I would like to invite Dr. Mike Hennell, founder LDRA, and I have the pleasure of introducing Mike. After 23 years as professor at the University of Liverpool, Dr. Mike Hennell founded LDRA and was a principal architect of the LDRA tool suite. He continues to guide the development of LDRA technology in his current position as technical director. Mike actively participates on both the MISRA C and C double plus committees, that is, as well as the international committee developing and promoting the new avionics software standard DO-178C. Let's hear it for Dr. Mike to deliver the next keynote address.
The first problem I have is my half-hour talk seems to have 15 minutes now. I also was amused this morning to notice that we have a different variety of speakers here. We have Indians, and then we have West Indians, and I'm a third variety, I'm an Anglo-Indian. So, what I'm going to first do is introduce my company and what we do and where we fit in to the Make in India concept and actually what we're doing about it. So I'll move along as fast as I can. The company was founded in Liverpool in 1975, so we're a very long surviving software company, tool vendor. We have been subjected to almost every certification trauma that is possible. We make software tools, and yet those tools have been certified to DO-178B level A, which is for safety critical software. A tool cannot kill anybody, but nevertheless you can't argue when you're being assessed. Similarly, in the automotive world, we have to be certified to IEC 61508 and IEC 26262. And again, we've been assessed at the most critical level, due wholly, of course, to the incompetence of the assessors. Shouldn't happen, but there you go. If we look at the embedded tools market, now I've got a problem. I can't see these slides any better than you can. So the problem we've got is there's a huge growth in these embedded products. The number of products going out into the public now is vast. Previously, the products were going into very specific things like aeroplanes, and they're relatively low numbers. And then it came cars, where you're much higher numbers. Today, it's going into all sorts of things like mobile phones. The number of apps is stunning. So the market's got a real problem. And I have a real problem too, because of my age, my eyes aren't so good, and I can't see that one, I can't see that one, and I can't see that one. So I just have to struggle on. So I try to be brave. Now, alongside all this, what's happening is regulatory trends. And this is really the subject of my talk. Governments are up to here with software which doesn't work. And actually, so are the rest of us. How many of us have been sitting there typing that great document which is going to make us famous, and suddenly it all goes pear-shaped, and you think, what did I do? And you hit the undo button and it goes worse. So we've all had enough of this, so the regulations are coming in. Security is really the thing which is driving this. So much bad news in security. So these are the issues I'm going to look at. The problem with hardware and software is complexity. Now, hardware has always been complex, and there was a belief at one time that the real trick was to put all the functionality into software because that was real easy. Those days have gone. Hardware and software are just the same today. It makes no difference. You have to go through the same sort of processes, you have the same trials and tribulations, and at the end of it you've got to satisfy various standards. And I'll come to that. Safety and security. Now, we know what safety is. We've been doing that for a long time. The very first safety systems I came across were in the nuclear industry in the 1970s. And the nuclear industry always used to do an enormously careful job on their computer systems. Then along came avionics, and the game changed. And of course, the automotive industry is the best of the lot. You can't help laughing at this crash. 8 Ferraris, 3 Mercedes, and a Lamborghini just to put the icing on the cake. Brilliant. And the amazing thing is, not a single person was seriously injured. On the other hand, the extreme end, you've got the problems of poor Boeing with the 787, where one thing passengers do not want is an open fire on board. And that's what Boeing were getting. And that delayed, well, it's one of the many factors which delayed the aeroplane, but I think it very nearly brought Boeing to their knees. So safety, we know a lot about it. We've done a lot of work on it. We can detect failures and respond. Security, though, is a different game. President Obama has even launched a tirade against this. The Americans, the Department of Homeland Security, have poured millions of dollars into trying to find out how to write secure software. The position we're in today is that we can divide the problems in the software really into 2 categories. There's the technological defects. This is using the language wrongly. This is ignorance of programmers. And essentially, it's the way you build the software. You want to build it right. The second class of defects are application. This is building the right software. The right software for the job you have in mind. There's no excuse for the technological defects. We know a lot about those. We can detect most of them. Application defects, tricky. You've got to know your application area very well. You've got to have the right vision, and you can still get it wrong. So safety critical, we do harm to human beings. Security, we do harm indirectly to human beings. We deprive them of their identity, of their money, of other features of their life. And it's, in the main, it seems to me that the security one is the one most people care about. Chance and risk, people are used to, particularly India. I mean, I think India's calm acceptance of the dangers on the road are stunning. I just need to walk outside to see that. So, security is coming in, but these days, security and safety are coming together. And we've had this wonderful example of a Jeep driving along the road and someone on the pavement controlling it, much to the annoyance of the driver. And people are going to find that unacceptable if it gets too big, and it might easily do so. So safety and security are coming together, and security can learn from the mature area of safety. So safety hazards are normally identified and safety cases are generated. And one thinks a lot about safety before the software or even the hardware is designed. And there are certain things you know you don't want. In the safety world, we have always accepted there shall be no unwanted code in there. The rule is simple. If there's no requirement for the code, then it shouldn't be there and it has to go. And the avionics standards, for instance, say that. It has to go. If you don't have unwanted code in there, you don't have intrusive code, you don't have malicious code, all those are gone because they don't satisfy the requirements of the particular application. It's most unlikely that your requirements would be to have some malicious software. And in safety, we perform robustness testing. We hammer that software, usually via unit testing techniques. You put inputs in of all extraordinary varieties and make sure that the software copes properly. It either gets the right answers or it does something sensible with the faulty values. In safety, you could do the same thing. People don't, but you can. So you can set up, identify the safety hazards, construct safety cases, think about things, construct your requirements. But curiously enough, one of the things you don't want is unwanted code. And we've known how to get rid of that for over 30 years. And the other thing that they do is perform robustness testing. What do they do with robustness testing? Well, they try to put inputs into the software to get it to do strange and wonderful things. Well, that's exactly the same as robustness testing. Two different words for essentially the same thing. Curiously enough, the biggest difference between the safety world and the security world is that in the security world, nobody cares whether the software does what it's required to do. The emphasis is that it mustn't do some things. The other things that it might be required to do, nobody cares about. So if the software doesn't perform correctly, as long as it does no secondary harm to anybody. So, my conclusion is there's really very little difference between these two security areas from the point of view of the technical faults in the software. Technical faults, we can get them out of the safety software. We can do the same in the security. Motivations are different, essentials are the same. Now, having got through all that, there's a small hurdle, a political hurdle. It's certification. And this is going to be important to India. Or at least that's my my thesis. If you're going to go into global markets, you've got to be aware of certification. Most of the developed countries have set up standards, internal standards, which products sold in those countries must satisfy. It's a belief in Britain, for instance, that you cannot buy a domestic appliance where you would get an electric shock, because there's a mark on the back of the thing which says it satisfies a standard where somebody at least has tried to do it. They've poked screwdrivers in and done all sorts of things to make sure you can't get an electric shock. So, trouble with certification is there's many levels to it. The finished product, the design, the implementation. There's a huge variety of regulatory standards. Today, this is a small sample of the ones which software needs to satisfy for international markets. The fundamental one here is IEC 61508. It has 4 safety integrity levels, 1 to 4. 4 is the highest level, that's safety critical. And it specifies the steps that you must take to show that your software is good enough for a product of that type. For the automotive, you've got ISO 26262. Curiously enough, until recently, that applied only to basically cars. It doesn't apply to motorbikes, and it doesn't apply to lorries or buses, except that the IESA ruled just recently, devastatingly in one case, that if you don't have a specific standard for your product, you must satisfy the nearest one. And suddenly the lorry manufacturers discovered they've got to satisfy 26262. And so did the motorcycles. Now the motorcycles had an argument of their own. They did point out that why are we worrying about the safety aspects of the software on a motorbike, which is intrinsically dangerous? That's a point, it's a point. So, but I think they're still going to have to conform. And medical devices, railway, and they have variations on these standards. The most famous standard of all is the D0178B, D0178C standards for avionics. These have been going since 1992, and it is stunning how reliable avionics software is. The number of problems in aircraft we've had since that standard came out is minute compared with the number flying and the hours they fly. You cannot put an aircraft in the skies of most countries unless they satisfy that standard. Even military planes in some places must satisfy that standard, even though it's a civil standard. In software, we also have special standards for things like security. CERT, this comes from money put forward by the Department of Homeland Security in the United States. This is the US government saying enough is enough. Since the problem is in software, put in place standards which prevent this stuff happening. And CERT is an attempt to do it. The government also maintains statistics, the CWE, which is the Common Weakness Enumerations, a meaningless term, but they're trying to list the bugs. Then here we have an unusual one. This is part of the C programming language. The government said to the designers of the C language, it's your language which causes most of the trouble, fix it. So they produced a standard. You must satisfy these rules now to be able to sell software in the United States. And it goes on. In Britain, the British government has just completed an activity. We now have a provisional British standard for software. It's only going to start taking a few legal cases now for that to become mandatory to sell anything in Britain. So, where does that leave India? Well, India doesn't have any standards for software. There's no such thing, I understand, as an Indian software standard. Maybe you need one. Maybe you need to think about how you react to the rest of the world if you're trying to sell products abroad. It's not enough to say, think about making them for the rest of the world. You've got to make them so that you can sell them there. And if the countries demand that a standard be satisfied, then you have to do that. So there's a huge implication there. Now the snag as we see it as a company is manifold. We've heard academics blamed for the lack of skills that industry needs. As an ex-academic, I'm not happy with that. When you're an academic, you're burdened down with administration, worrying about students, trying to prepare your lectures, trying to do some research, and then you find that what you're teaching the students isn't what industry wants. Industry has got to come to you and tell you what they want. And it's even better if they come to you with material which will help you prepare the courses. So it's not enough to blame the universities, you need to help them. Similarly, with industry, there's very little awareness in India about the international standards in software. I know that because we're involved with the industry there. So there's a whole need for awareness and education in these fields. Maybe Indians should go and sit on these committees that design these standards and perhaps bring a slight Indian perspective to these things. It's, as I go around the world, I sit on a lot of these committees, and you know what? It's very often the same people all the living time. You need fresh blood, a wider scope of people. Regulatory bodies need teeth. In other words, it must be impossible for you to sell your product unless it satisfies standards which meet public expectations. The consumer must be considered in this. So, it's time to act. Well, LDRA is not a very big company, so we can't educate. Is it 1.3 billion, did I hear earlier this morning? Someone said about 1.3 billion, so there's doubt. Difficult in counting. Nobody stands still long enough. So, if we do things together, we can make some progress in this area. And our company is setting out some initiatives. We've started putting on some large conferences where we bring experts from around the world. It'd be nice to bring in Indian experts as well. Well, we do some of that, but mainly at the moment the expertise is outside of India. Bring them in, get them talking to people so there's awareness. Why do you need these standards? Why is it important? We're doing an academic alliance program. You can see where that's coming from. I'm obviously a bit sympathetic to the poor professors in universities, underpaid, undervalued, you know the story. And we're also now constructing an LDRA competency centre. What we're doing is it's a front end. We don't know everything. But what we can do is bring together a gang who collectively can produce a lot of skills and knowledge. We're propagating information on safety and security practices. Why do you need to do these things? What do you get? What's the benefit in these things? Similarly, we're about to put in place a knowledge portal. Again, it's not just us, it's a whole gang, because we just don't know. Much as we'd like to know everything, we have to acknowledge we don't. So it's again a collection of companies and people who represent a place where you can go to if you need some information. And a certification monitoring program. Sorry, mentoring program. Monitoring would be good. But trying to help people get through this certification program. Our company actually does this with avionics. If you have an avionics project, we can take you right through the certification program, right from constructing the requirements, right through to the delivery of the code. We do that as one of our commercial activities. But that sort of technology is very expensive for some companies. There are lesser ways of achieving that. And what we want to do is put together some sort of organization where you can go there and get some help not have someone come in with heavy boots and trample all over you and change the way you do things necessarily, but just show you how in possibly small ways you can improve and achieve these goals. Because not all these standards are necessarily hard to achieve. Some of them are tough, really tough, as they ought to be if you can kill somebody, but generally speaking, achieving these standards is no big deal. So, I managed to only overflow my time by 10 minutes. So at that point, thank you very much.
That's all right, 10 minutes of extra information, and as much as it was a pleasure to listen to the West Indian this morning, it's been very, very insightful to listen to the Anglo-Indian as well, as he called himself. Please, let's hear it for Dr. Mike Hennell. I would in fact request Dr. Madhu to step up on stage and hand over to the keynote speaker a token of our gratitude. Thank you so much for giving us a perspective to make it India. That was safe and secure design for global markets access. And thank you for a very informative session, Dr. Hennell.